So Gary O'Hanlon here. I've just finished with Ciara on Lunchtime Live, and I'm going to be joining you here now for the next 10-15 minutes answering all your foodie questions, so get them in.
So Gary, there was one Wednesday dinner that you actually didn't get to, so do you want to chat to us a bit about that? Is it Cockle Van?
Yeah. Cockle Van, yeah. So we ended up talking about Jamie Oliver there for a while, so we never got to the second Wednesday dinner. So Cockle Van, so we talked about the prawn cocktail, a classic, and I suppose when I was putting in the prawn cocktail, then I thought about the fact of another classic in Cockle Van. It's something I haven't made in a while, but basically you're gonna cut what a whole chicken up for saute. Generally you got 8 pieces, so take a whole chicken. So you've got the leg and the thigh. You'll have 2 legs and thighs, and then basically you'll cut through the breast meat. Cut off like the base part of the carcass, and then you're leaving the breast part, and you've got the 2 breasts on the bone, and then basically you're going to split through the breastplate, leaving the 2 breasts on the bone, and then you're then in turn going to cut them in half. So you're going to have 4 pieces of breast meat with a little bit of bone on the underside, and that'll be your 8 pieces. I suppose one of the first things I should have told you there, any culinary lecturers out there would tell you, remove the wishbone before you butcher your chicken. It's one of the first things you'll always do, okay, just because you'll get more meat. The wishbone keeps a wee bit of the meat near the tail end intact. And basically what I do, season really, really well with salt and pepper. Heat up an oven-ready casserole dish. Sear the skin to get a lovely, lovely golden colour. Turn it over. Then I lift them out. Add in some shallots, a little bit of button mushrooms as well to that. Sweat them off with a little bit of oil that's coming from the chicken fat and the skin that's there. Season really, really well. Add in a good, generous amount of chopped fresh thyme. Then I pour in like a Shiraz or a Merlot. And when it comes to wine, just buy cheap, but still buy wine in the store. Like, I mean, most people in the public wouldn't have access to cooking wines anyway that would be seasoned, and even chefs, I would always say, like, never use that wine. Always use like any kind of a store-bought drinkable wine, and a Merlot or a Shiraz works really well for this because it's quite strong. Reduce that then by half. Put back in your chicken pieces, then bring it up to the boil, and then put a lid onto it. Put it into an oven that's preheated to about 150, 160 degrees, and then leave that for about an hour, 45 minutes to 2 hours, 15 minutes, depending on the strength of your oven. You're looking in and around the 2 hour mark, and just lift out. Probably the best piece to take a look at would be like the thigh piece or whatever, and just use a fork, put it on a plate, and push the fork against the meat, and if it's coming away from the bone, you know it's ready. And then what I do then is lift out the chicken pieces, let them settle, and then reduce down your sauce as much as you can, and serve that with some lovely buttery baby potatoes, or some potatoes that are boiled in the jackets, a little bit of chopped parsley and butter on them, and some green beans. Absolutely beautiful, and that's a classic right there that you will not regret getting stuck into it.
Okay, so somebody's wrote in to ask, do you have any tips on making porridge more exciting? Sometimes they find it quite bland.
Oh, porridge, making porridge exciting. Well, do you know what? I suppose Nevin Maguire probably does a brilliant job at that. Anyone that's ever stayed in McNean House will tell you that. I think it's Irish Mr. Nevin. Nevin does his porridge with some whiskey. So if you ever want a real nice kick off to your morning, go to Nevin's and have some whiskey on your porridge. That certainly does it. What I love to do actually would be bananas and maple syrup and some blueberries, okay? And literally couldn't be simpler. I mean, what I might do is bring a pan up to heat, and get a nice wee bit of heat into it, add some bourbon to it, flambe the bourbon. While the bourbon is still flambeing, drop in some blueberries, drop in some bananas, and then pour in some maple syrup, and it almost quenches the flame as you're doing it, okay? And then you'll cook that down just for a few minutes until like it just gets quite sticky, and you want to still take it off when the blueberries are still, you're only really just sort of puncturing and bursting the skin, and the bananas are still intact, but like obviously a little bit cooked, a little bit heated through, and then you're spooning on that maple, bourbon, banana and blueberry compote onto your porridge. And I suppose maybe not one for the everyday if you're jumping in the car afterwards, but it really is a beautiful combination, bourbon and maple, and that's one that I would do. And then for texture, if you wanted just even to add some even granola or any sort of crunch to that as well, I just tend to sprinkle a wee bit around the edges just for a wee bit more texture, because everything can be soft, and that's not for me anyway.
Okay, the next one in is, do you have any tips on how to make a good homemade burger? I find when I make them, they can often taste quite gamey.
Quite gamey, wow. Well, if you're tasting quite gamey, you might be using meat that's just maybe, I don't know, unless you're using game mince or whatever, which I doubt very much you are. I mean, game mince would be no good for a burger because it's quite simply too lean. 85-15. If you're ever buying mince in the States, you'd always buy it 90-10, which is 90% meat, 10% fat, 85% meat, 15% fat, and 85-15. That's the perfect ratio. Always buy mince that has a nice little bit of fat, a nice little bit of marbling in it, okay? Again, get a good beef mince. I love a beef burger. It's absolutely the best way to go for me. Anyway, lamb is actually quite nice as well. Can be a wee bit more pricey, but still equally beautiful. So go with beef mince into a bowl. Drop in an egg. Drop in like about a tablespoonful of Worcester sauce, a teaspoonful of Tabasco sauce, and then your whole egg, salt, white pepper. And then what I do then is I sort of mix that up well, and then I feed it with a fresh breadcrumb, okay? And you just want to have it that it's starting to dry. It's dry enough that the meat's not sticking to the edges of the bowl. And then squeeze it together, and basically your two hands, your two fists together. And if you have a decent sort of handful of meat that your fingers are meeting and you have a nice ball of meat, that's a real nice sort of deep sized beef burger, and then just cook it from there. And I think when you're manipulating with a little bit of the ketchup and the Worcester and things like that, you're adding other elements of flavour to it as well. And if you want a little bit of fresh parsley in there as well. But I suppose if your homemade burgers are gamey, that's down to where you're buying your meat, like, because they really shouldn't be in any way smelling or tasting like that, you know.
So can you recommend a good carbonara recipe?
Oh, carbonara recipe. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give a nod here to the late, great Paolo Tullio, who would have done what I do now with Kira. Paolo would have did the recipes and the food chats for many, many years. And geez, you know, obviously he was a colleague of mine on the restaurant as well. And I dearly miss him myself. He's been good to me through the years, but nothing used to set Paolo off more than carbonara in Ireland. He used to travel here, there, and everywhere. I don't know how often I saw him and his good friend Tom Durley going off on one whenever people will be chatting about carbonara and whatnot. There's no cream in carbonara, and anyone that thinks there is, Paolo will be hissing down on you from above, I can tell you now, for nothing. Basically, pancetta, render some good pancetta, okay, and take off the fat. And to render is basically to take out any of the fat that is within it, okay. And you start to render from a cold pan, where normally I'd be telling you to seal everything and sear everything in a hot pan. Get a cold pan, non-stick, heavy base, to get it on, get the pancetta, and as I say, no more than what covers the base of the pot or the pan that you're using. Turn it up to a high heat. Whenever you see it starting to sort of cook and sizzle, turn that heat way, way down to between low and medium. Time is of the essence here. Just let that gently simmer away, and you're going to get a nice little bit of a fat bubble on the fat. And as the white of the fat is coming in closer to the meat, you're getting rid of all that fat, and you'll start to see your pancetta then almost bubbling in a little simmer of oil. Keep that going until you've rendered the fat. While that's happening, cook some store-bought spaghetti, boil in salted water. And then you want to have some Parmesan cheese, about 70-80 grams of Parmesan cheese. You're looking at about 100 grams of spaghetti, by the way, per person. Or as I say, this much here. Like, get the spaghetti into your fingers like this. When it jams in, that's enough for one. Okay? And then Pecorino cheese, or good Parmesan, aged Parmesan cheese, mixed up, part of it, maybe 100 grams of cheese, maybe 25-30 grams, but mixed up with some egg yolks, maybe 2 or 3 eggs whisked up, part of it in with the cheese. So you render the bacon, then strain off all the fat from your pancetta, add in your spaghetti to that and season it. And then what you want to do is you want to feed it with your Parmesan and egg mixture, okay? And then just keep feeding a little bit of the egg and whisking it as you go, and your egg becomes your sauce into a bowl. Loads of the excess, any Parmesan cheese is left over, put a lovely generous grating of aged Parmesan over it, and then finish it with freshly ground black pepper. Make sure that the corns are whole, crunch it at the end, and then that's whenever you're really getting the benefit of the pepper as well. And that's how I do mine anyway, and I hope that's alright for the big man.
Sounds good. So how do you nail a good garlic butter?
Oh, good garlic butter. Really, really simple, alright? Get some garlic, put it, you can actually wrap the whole cloves, skin and all on, in tin foil, put them into an oven and just roast your garlic, okay? that's the one thing that I will say is whenever a lot of people make garlic butter with just raw grated garlic or crushed garlic, and then they'll stuff that garlic butter into like a chicken for a cave, or they'll stuff it into mushrooms for a garlic mushroom. The one thing I will say though is your garlic never really gets to cook, and that's whenever you get the bad breath and the sort of aftertaste of garlic then. So first thing you do is you roast or confit your garlic until you're able to squish it out of the clove skin into a bowl, and then have Kerrygold butter, good Irish butter, have it come to room temperature. Do not melt the butter. Have the butter sitting at the room temperature until you can put a spoon through it, or it moves, or you can put on some kitchen gloves and you can squish it up. Put your butter then, I say a pound of butter, but I could maybe make 6, 7, 8, 10 pounds of it at a time. So if I was at home, I'd probably take, say, half a pound of Kerrygold, and I would have maybe one full bulb of garlic that I've confited or roasted, and I squeeze out all that roast garlic into the half pound of butter. I'd add a really very generous handful of freshly chopped curly parsley into that. I'd hit it then with a little bit of white pepper and a little bit of maybe grated or ground black pepper as well. Mix it up with a spoon, and again, never ever letting it melt, but at a temperature that it's movable and pliable. And then I'd put that into a little piping bag, and I'd stuff it under the skin of a chicken or into the flesh of a chicken, into the mushrooms. Key thing though, anytime that you stuff anything, say if you do a garlic mushroom, what I will say, because generally that's people either melt the garlic butter then and serve it as a dip, and that's perfectly fine, or take a piece of it, you can put it onto greaseproof paper, you can roll it up into a disc, put it into the freezer. When you want to take it out, you can cut one slice of it, the greaseproof just peels off, you sit it on your steak and it'll gently melt over your steak. That's one thing of doing with it. If you're going to make garlic mushrooms or you're going to make a chicken cave, what I will say is when it is soft and pliable at room temperature, that's whenever you use it. Breadcrumb your chicken or breadcrumb your mushrooms. You must then put the mushrooms back into the fridge for about an hour, half an hour to an hour. The butter goes hard, and what happens then is when you're cooking, it just takes that little bit longer for the butter to melt, and as the dish is cooking, the butter is gently almost basting it and feeding into the mushroom or feeding into the chicken. So always key, after you've made it, get it back up to the hardness again and then cook from there.
Okay, so Caroline asks, I've just made a chili con carne and it's very spicy. Is there any way to tone down the heat?
Yeah. Well, the one way of toning down the heat, as I always do, is maybe hit it with the juice of one or two limes or a lemon. Okay, then whenever you serve it, if you're gonna serve it with rice, or you're gonna serve it with maybe as a topping on a baked potato, put a big dollop of natural yogurt, or Glenesk organic natural yogurt is absolutely beautiful. It's quite thick as well, but yogurt is amazing at cutting through any excess spice, and again a little bit of that citric acid as well will help. So hit it with the juice of some lemon or some lime, and then without a shadow of a doubt, I would always recommend it anyway, even if it's not overly spicy. Always have a big dollop of natural yogurt with any of your chili, and you'll never look back.
Okay, so this comes in from Aisling, and this is our last question. So she said she works full time and gets home late in the evening, so she's always kind of grabbing things on the go. She would like to cook more. Can you recommend a few dishes that are easy?
Ooh, dishes that are easy. Well, just the one that the previous question mentioned there, chili con carne, is absolutely brilliant. My life sounds very, very similar to yours, and even my wife's. That I'm on the road a lot, which leaves my wife with the kids a good bit. That leaves Annette quite busy. So anytime we cook, I always try to cook dishes that are freezable. So I love Ballin A's. I might make a Ballin A's, and I might make a massive batch of it. So I would freeze a few Tupperware containers of that. Before I would head out to work, I would take something out of the freezer and leave it out, or before going to bed at night, I might leave it out. And then, technically you should be defrosting in the fridge, but for something you want the next night, when you're going to bed tonight, if you had a little Tupperware container of a bolognese or a beef chili, and you put it into your fridge, when you get home from work tomorrow evening, put that in a pan and heat it up, and it's absolutely perfect. Lasagna is another one that's perfect. You can make a lasagna, let it cool, then put it in the fridge for a couple of hours, and then once it's properly cold, you can actually cut it into perfect squares. and into containers. The key thing is just buying yourself loads of little tubs and Tupperware containers that are nice and square and can stack up on top of each other, and they're absolutely brilliant for freezing. I use my freezer at home more than you can imagine. It's the same for soups. I make everything in big batches. I try never ever to have to cook every day of the week, because people are busy, whether you have kids or whether you don't, or it's work. And I think the older you get, the busier you get with work. So if you think it's going to get any easier, it's not. It's just people are just busy now all the time. Cook in bulk, and don't be afraid of a larger pot of something, and just make sure it's something that is freezable. But chilies are brilliant, bologneses are brilliant, curries freeze really, really well. That's another thing. And then again, have 8 or 9 week containers that you'll get at any store that you can just freeze them up. And if you've got 2 or 3 dinners that you make over a weekend, you can be rotating them then through a week or two here and there, that you're not eating the same thing every day.
How would you make the bolognese?
Well, I suppose to make the bolognese really, really simple. Loads of onions, mushrooms for me, okay, and then beef mince again. Get a really heavy based, invest in a good heavy base pot, okay? And the reason is you can cook something for low and slow for a long time. It doesn't really burn either, And get the oil hot, add in your mince, season it really, really well, salt, white pepper, and then once it's kind of browned off, pour off some excess fat, add in a load of onions, some garlic, a little mushrooms in as well. Some people might like to bulk up things with some peppers. I just like to keep it with the onions and the mushrooms, and cook them in a little bit as well. Decent amount of garlic and a good handful of fresh chopped thyme, or some dry thyme if you can't get access to fresh thyme. Cook that out for a while, and then I just feed that then with like 4 or 5 tins of chopped mince. You're probably looking at about 2 pound of mince, okay? And I would then add about 4 tins of chopped tomatoes and mix it up really, really well. Bring that to the boil, turn it down to a simmer, add some Worcester sauce to it as well, and then let that cook really, really slowly, that you're just getting the odd little bubble out of it, okay? And then the little tubes of tomato puree, I would squeeze in about a half a tube of tomato puree near the end. Give it a good taste. And then I'd always add a good big handful of fresh basil right at the very end as well. Again, you don't need to do that. It adds a wee bit more money to it. But just for flavour and being a chef, I'd always add, if I get my hands on it, especially this time of year, herbs are everywhere. Big handful of fresh basil. And just let it settle, just the seasoning then. And it couldn't be an easier dish to cook, Oh, that's us. All right, last question. Well, listen, I'll be back here next Wednesday, hopefully, so tune in around 2 o'clock again, right when I finish up with Kira on Lunchtime Live. We'll be back in here with Nessa. Thank you.